through and look at this bill
You're on.
as, oh, we're on it. Okay, welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. We have a double task as we look at our housing bill we got from our House colleagues. We're looking at the bill both as passed by the committee, which includes all their original hopes and desires and what they could land as a committee in terms of their financial asks and their policy asks. We also need to look at the bill as passed by the House, which had the Appropriations Committee and the Ways and Means Committee had stripped all the money piece, all the back for expenditures and the Appropriation Act. So we are going to compare both as passed by the committees and as passed by the two separate chambers. And we have a side-by-side comparison. And I think we're going to start with as passed by the committee. Is that right? Is that where we can
start where you would like to start?
That was sort of where I would like to start, unless the committee feels differently. Is that okay for us to do that? And then we can appreciate what was stripped out as we go along. Is that okay? We have this document as to compare the two.
So
Where would you like us? You are our counsel. Where would you like us?
there are two versions. One of them, draft 1 point, or it's just listed as introduced, is
2.2 you wanted. I don't know.
well, so there's two, right? There's one that says as introduced, and then draft 2.2 is as passed. So
Okay.
I'm just letting you know that there are two different versions.
2.2.
And so to,
Do
be
you have
aware of that.
2.2 printed, or do we just,
You have 2.2 printed and
where is that?
We have as introduced.
We have as
That is a
introduced.
separate document.
Ask the question, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So are there only changes related to the money? And if I were to then look at the three fiscal notes comparing what came and then out of the first committee and then what came out of their Ways and Means, then out of appropriations, would that also be a good summarization of the differences?
Yes, the only thing that
Yeah, there's some-
similar to your bill, the Ways and Means Committee and the Appropriations Committee in the House just removed all of the appropriations associated. There were no amendments on the floor, so they did not add anything. So,
oh no, Kathy, thank you.
okay,
So
yeah,
for purposes today, let's begin by looking at it as introduced by the committee.
Okay.
And then we can talk about the changes they made as they go through. And we do have, I believe you each have this side by side, either printed or on. Is that right, Heidi? We have this side by side as
Sort of
confused.
Um,
I don't want to confuse everybody.
I emailed it to them earlier this week, but I haven't printed it. It's
Okay.
48 pages to me to print.
Yeah, no, it's.
I'll email it again.
I have 38 pages. If you email it, we can pull it up.
so
Okay, and we also have this. So
I think this is fine.
let's start with this document, which we have at the moment. Heidi, let's start with this one.
Okay.
And we're gonna just go through it. And I'd love as much as possible to identify the areas we need further discussion on and further testimony. There are whole areas we haven't even addressed. And then the ones that we're okay with, let's just check off if we're okay. And there are some changes in VHIP. So let's talk about the Cam, it's yours.
yes, ma'am. This is what I'm gonna do before I share my screen. I'm going to send this email to you all, so you have it at the top of your inbox. What I want to make sure, because you can understand the potential for confusion,
Yeah,
there
because it's unconfused.
are two separate side by sides, because there is the version as it was introduced,
Right.
and then there's the version as passed, and those are two different things because things were stripped out and things in your bill were added.
Right.
So what I'm doing is I'm sending an email very quickly to this committee,
Right.
and I'm going to include both documents so you have it. For those that have their computer, you can bring it up. Give me just a quick moment.
Okay. And I believe, yeah, and then we're gonna just start with as
And then we will start with their bill as it was introduced by the House General Committee. Heidi, you're gonna be on this email as well.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So again, I have two documents in the email I sent you, the as introduced version and the as passed version side by side. Madam Chair, the last question I have before we get started,
Yeah,
do you want to look at their bill as introduced in a side by side as compared to your bill, or do you want to just walk through the language?
you have this up and down, this vertical document is just as without a comparison.
Yes.
I think we can start here and verbally talk about the comparisons.
Okay.
The comparisons are useful in this document because they're in yellow.
Right.
And so, part of me thinks that even though, that this is more useful.
Okay. Yeah, we'll start there.
Is that okay?
Are we still just talking about what we're gonna look at?
Yes.
Well, I mean, we've had this discussion, so I think seeing what the differences are in the sections of the same is most of it.
Okay.
So let's start there.
And I was just stalling for time, so I can pull things up on my laptop.
Okay, great. And you have just sent this to it. Of course, it hasn't arrived yet, but that's okay.
Okay.
So let's start with as introduced side by side so that we can see the differences in yellow
That's great.
on both sides.
For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. What I'm sharing is side-by-side comparison. Again, this is
Can you make it a
draft.
tiny bit bigger?
Yes, ma'am. This is draft 1.2.
Right.
So this is the side-by-side of the two bills as they were introduced by the committees. So this is going to be your bill as introduced by this committee. H 479 is introduced. So for example, this isn't going to include the amendments that this committee, members of this committee
Right.
made on the floor. Okay. So the way this is organized is on the left, it's the House side. On the right, it's the Senate side. The left is going to be in section order. So your bill is going to jump around just slightly, but just here we go. Section 1 is related. The first three sections are going to be the same section for both bills. Section 1 is the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program. And as you can see, the first amendment, the first few amendments are the same amendments that you have. There's a few slight, changes. Here, the House added, carrying out the provision of that section, just adds a little more, clarity to the language there. If you remember, this is exempting these entities from the licensed lender requirements, nonprofits that are loaning out money under the BDIP program, but not banks. So the administration wanted to add this language, so we're not treating them as banks. And then the next amendment here at the bottom of page 2, very similar. The big difference in the House version versus the Senate version is here on page 2. And in the House version, they chose to keep the 5-year forgivable loans, whereas the Senate version struck the 5-year forgivable loans. So if you recall under BDIP, you can get a grant or a 5-year forgivable loan, in which case the landlord has to lease the unit to an individual who is among these populations, one of these populations, exiting homelessness, actively working with an immigrant refugee resettlement, etc. You can get a 10-year forgivable loan where you have to maintain for 10 years. The change is to rent that unit for fair market rent as established by HUD. The House wanted to keep the option of giving a 5-year loan.
So 5 years for enabling people exiting homelessness. That is the big difference, is that it gives a 5-year options. for
It's
that.
another option for the landlord to take. The landlord can take either a grant or a 5-year loan, in which case they have to rent to those populations of people, or they can take the 10-year loan. In your bill, you struck the 5-year loan, so it would just be grants for 10-year loans.
Right.
Okay.
So the 5-year grants included those who are exiting homelessness,
Yes.
but only for 5 years.
Correct.
For both, right?
Correct. So it just becomes a question for you all. Do you want to keep the option for giving out a 5-year forgivable loan, in which case they simply have to comply with the requirements if they were to get a grant? So the remaining, amendments here, changing, the language, instead of coordinated entry, homelessness service, et cetera, all of this is the same in the two versions. You, if you recall, added among the populations that can be served under a grant, you added displaced due to activity related to climate change or due to natural disaster. That is not in the House bill. When we get to the
And
next.
so as we go through this, I'm just marking all our decision points. So that we have a decision point in one key.
So then to the next page, again, for the 10-year forgivable loans, both bills would, revert back to allowing the landlord to rent those units for fair market rent as established by HUD. The other change in the two versions is here, where the House wanted to require the Department of Housing and Community Development to set aside a set amount of funds annually to go to the grants or the forgivable loans. So the trade-off here from the House perspective, you're gonna, on the 10-year side, we're gonna allow you to go to fair market rent. You're not gonna be required to loan to lease the unit to an individual among one of those populations. So we're going to balance that by then requiring there be a certain amount of funds annually set aside to serve the grants or 5-year loans, which would then ensure that those units were rented to an individual among one of those populations. Does that make sense?
Sort of.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
The thought being, if we're going to so again,
Yeah, we're taking away
on the 10-year loans,
On the 10-year
you
piece.
currently have to rent to an individual serving one of those populations. The same with the grants. So if we're going to take that back and we're going to allow you to just rent for fair market rent,
well,
in
HUD,
theory,
fair-
fair market rent,
Different.
in theory, those units may not be going to individuals who are in those populations. So we're going to now require you to set aside a specific amount of money to ensure that it's going to rehab units that will be, available for the.
So this
That
is a
was the
requirement for the 10-year crowd to save 30%.
This is a requirement for the program annually to set aside a certain amount of money to go to the grants for the 5-year loans, which when those units are rehabbed, have to serve those populations. So if you're getting $1 million a year, 300,000 of it, you have to use to go to the 5-year loans or the grants, because those are the units that will serve those populations.
So this is a charge to DHCD.
Correct. So this is in G. Annually, the department shall establish a minimum allocation funding set aside to be used for the 5-year grants or forgivable loans to serve eligible households pursuant to subsection E. Remaining funds may be used for either those programs or the 10-year forgivable loan.
Patient. Oh, sorry, David.
If I can.
Yeah.
So you have insight into both committees. Is any other understanding what the logic is here on the 30% set aside?
Why 30%?
Well, why?
Or why do the set aside at all?
Yeah.
So again, it's right now, whether you're doing a grant, whether you're doing a 5-year loan, whether you're doing a 10-year loan, all of them have to serve one of these populations of people. And so the thought being, the administration is proposing to say for the 10 years, we don't want to serve those. I don't say we don't want to serve. We're not going to be required to serve those people. We're just going to do fair market rent, which could be to any individual. So the thought from the committee was we want to make sure that there are funds that are still going to go to serve these people.
People
So
exiting
if you
homelessness.
remove to the 10-year and it's just fair market rent, you could have all the landlords go to the 10-year. And so now we're not creating any units that would serve these populations of individuals. That was the concern.
Okay.
If you're making that change, all the landlords go to the 10-year, nobody's getting served into these.
I get that. So are we also going to take testimony at some point about justifying this?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So they have the,
Funds that are being set aside, which funds are being set aside? Any particular fund?
The appropriations.
these would be appropriations to the VA program. So
Are the
currently,
appropriations going to be a program in the future?
this would be a requirement moving forward. Any funds appropriated for that program, there would have to be 30%. So for example, in FY 26, there's $4 million in the House budget that would go to this program. So 30% of those dollars would have to be set aside.
Does this bind a future legislature?
Statute.
I don't think so. No, you could not withstand it if in a given year you chose that you didn't want the 30% to apply to the funds
An
that you're
affirmative
doing.
action has to be taken though, to change the trajectory. Is that correct?
Sure,
For future years? Sure.
but that's within any
But
program.
that's
parameter.
within, this is not inappropriate.
On this point.
Yeah.
We have been exhausting these allocated resources each year, right? It's not like that we're sitting on unexpended PHIP resources.
That's my understanding, but that's a better question for the department.
Okay.
So what's in here, though, if you go to subsection 2, it requires the department to consult with the Agency of Human Services on setting up that threshold every year. So it could be above 30%, but it's a minimum of 30%. So they have to look at the availability of housing vouchers, moving to the next page, current need for housing those eligible populations, the ability of landlords to do that, support services available, prior uptake and success rate, et cetera. The Department of Housing has to coordinate with local coordinated entry lead agencies and homeownership centers to direct referrals of individuals for those units that are going to come online. Subsection 4 here, the funds that are set aside that are not utilized after 1 year. So this is contemplating if the funds aren't used, then the following year they would be open to 10-year loans at that point. So we're requiring the set aside, but it's only for 1 year. And then
I don't get that at all. We're requiring 30%, but only for 1 year?
The discussion among the committee is what happens if the funds aren't given out because landlords don't want to, or there's no market for landlords doing that.
I understand what they're trying to accomplish. I think we just need to hear from DHCD if they welcome this. I don't know what AHS. I mean, AHS can give them a lot of data, but like the ability and desire of landlords to house eligible households, I don't know who figures that out. It is a conversation we wanted to have. But I feel like we're trying to fit a lot into this section.
Like,
Just seems complicated.
it seems complicated. It is getting, they have had a diminishment of the number of people wanting to
Absolutely.
take
Yeah,
some of these with this requirement. And
Yeah.
so we're both wanting, we're caught between competing goods here. And I think it needs to be simplified and we should hear from VHC and also from the committee.
something about this feels like some give and take with the
Yeah.
former chair of the committee.
Yeah.
Or something, just like somebody wanted
Yeah.
to overcomplicate it.
Okay.
And my
Yeah.
understanding too, are these were addressing concerns from the Human Services Committee as well.
Yes. Okay. So maybe we have Teresa Waters and Mark in to talk about this section.
If I would just say, as time and resources are precious, we have the ability in our committee or in our own lives to figure out what is keeping people from being able to access these units and from landlord, like, I don't
Or
know who
requesting.
is asking.
Yeah.
I don't,
Well, let's start with DHCD and we'll
yeah, I just think this language is
overly, I would agree.
people who aren't really thinking about what this looks like on the ground, how we would achieve this.
I agree.
Okay.
So let's keep,
Subsection I is the same, both creating this revolving fund in the event that funds are repaid. Then the new subsection the House added is about reporting. So annually, the department shall submit a report to these respective committees, identifying the number of units that are funded and the number of units that have been rehabilitated. And then for the grants and the 5-year forgivable loans, for the first year after, the last line here, for the first year after the expiration of the lease requirements outlined in that subdivision, whether the unit is still occupied by a tenant who meets the qualifications of that subdivision. Then sub 3, for the first year after the expiration of the applicable lease requirements for the 10-year program, the amount of rent charged by the landlord and how that rent compares to fair market rent, and then the rate of turnover for tenants. The committee was trying to understand, you have these requirements in place, either for 10 years, either for 5 years. They have specific requirements that have to be met. What are the landlords doing with the units immediately after those requirements expire? Are they continuing to lease the unit at fair market rent or near fair market rent? Are they raising rent at that point as soon as the year after the requirements expire? Are they continuing to lease the unit to that individual who was placed in the unit who, fall into one of those populations or not? The department, testified and, asked them, advised them to come in and speak to you. They can't mandate that employers provide this information.
Employers are like,
Thank you.
Yeah.
half job. No, but I'm like, are we working employers?
They can request the information and provide what they get back. But at that point, if the landlord is, released of obligations from the program, it will be a voluntary disclosure at that point.
So my document is different from yours up there. Mine is not all yellow up there on 3 and 4. And it may be because I have draft 1.1 of this document.
Yes.
And so what you have sent around is draft
1.2.
Great.
And it's 0.2 because I realized some things weren't highlighted when I.
Yeah, so this is an example of that. Okay, great. But I'm just trying to, I thought, oh, I'm so lost, but actually I'm in this right section.
Yeah.
Okay. And the challenge here is, so they're asking to track this after people exit, after the agreement is completed,
Yes, ma'am.
to track what happens to the units.
Yes.
I think that's smart. I think we're only beginning probably to come out of the first 5 years. When did we enact this in the first place? In 21 or 22? So we're only next year, we're going to have the first 5-year crowd out of this.
I thought when we first created it was
COVID.
was it 5 years though?
I don't even think we've hit 5 years. I mean, we created VHIP in 2020.
No, I mean, like, was it a 5-year program? Was it a 5?
Yes, we had 5-year and 10-year.
Okay.
So anyway, we'll have DHCD
Yeah.
and then we'll discuss this. Okay.
It's just, this is too much.
But also to go to Randy's point, we do need to create the data on how effective our programs are. So if they're staying affordable, that's great. If they're just automatically going up to fair market value, maybe you need to probably know that.
It might be nice to just talk to a few people who access the program to hear about their experience. I mean, I just don't know what we're going to get from numbers on this.
Well, let's ask DHCD.
Because if it's voluntary, it's not going to be statistically significant necessarily. So
Yeah, maybe.
Well, we don't know the answer to any of that unless we have some numbers to tell us.
Right.
Well, sure. No, I'm happy to get the numbers, but like the value
The
compared to
anecdotal
the,
information may be useful if there.
right.
It may not be.
Right. The only people who respond might be the ones who are keeping their tenant or whatever. Don't they get it?
So
Okay.
as I say, we can look at it and then we just make a judgment.
Right. But are we setting up like new apparatus to
Yeah,
do this?
yeah, you don't want
Or
to
it may be easy for them to keep to track it because they've already got them in their system. Anyway, we will hear from DHCD and see how complicated it is. Okay, section 2.
Section 2 is the manufactured home improvement repair program. Best part about this section, there's no difference.
Okay.
So,
Right.
as you all recall, putting this in statute, there are 3
Right.
different ways that funds can go out. Some for manufactured park owners to, help get lot ready for infill. Some money can go directly to homeowners for which, their home is a primary residence to address habitability concerns.
Are we still trying to do another bill that?
We are. We're just beginning this work.
Okay,
We're gonna
I just didn't
continue.
know.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, section
My
3.
objective is to try and hear from all our our tenant colleagues on their bills and so, and this is a housing bill that Tanya has.
Section 3, Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, very minor difference in that when you go.
Oh, the other difference we didn't talk about with VDEP is they put in $15 million.
Not to be hit. No, they kept that at,
They kept
I
that.
believe that was the
Four.
governor's, the governor's
Okay.
recommendation.
Great, I'm sorry, I thought they'd put it at 50. Oh, they
For
put
the-
this next one at 50.
Yes, ma'am. The
Yeah.
Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, they recommended 15 million. The House General Committee recommended 15 million. Okay, so the only difference in the Infrastructure Sustainability Fund is under the application criteria. So in addition to criteria developed in the program, your project application shall be evaluated using the
Sorry, and that's
following.
on page,
This is going to be on page 9.
Yeah.
The Senate version has the ranking of the community on the Vermont Department of Finance and Management Vermont Community Index,
right,
and the House removed that. I was not in committee for the discussion of their concerns, so I would potentially defer to the chair of the committee to speak to you all as to their concerns there. I was just not present for that discussion. I did mention to them, I can't really speak to what the Vermont Community Index is, and I don't know how things are ranked or why that should factor into the criteria of determining whether to fund projects here. So you may want to hear from, I think it's the Department of Financial Regulation, believe that manages that, but
and I believe Michael asked for this.
it was
This is the-
originally in the proposal, yes. It was
Right.
not in addition from this committee, the House committee.
It's just the
removed it.
highlight of the difference. So it's another question of that.
Okay, you just said Michael. Who do you mean?
Michael Gahn, the
So the bond bank.
Vermont bond.
Oh, right.
Okay. That was the only difference in that program other than the amounts awarded.
Yeah,
So that,
money difference is, yeah,
We had so many indices floating around the last biennium, like the rural index and the, I
right.
don't know what this index is. How long it's been around.
We
Like we have to know what it is.
We had an inadequate time to talk to Michael, as I recall, on that day. And it was pretty rushed. And so perhaps on this section, we should invite Michael back in.
the next section, section 4, and as you can see in the bottom of this page, it's referencing to section 5 in your bill simply because the House version has a study committee. Your version had a study committee.
And this is
They're
page
studying
9.
two different things. This is, fits on
Page 10.
page 9 and 10.
Yeah.
So the House committee, which is on the left, it's a residential universal design study committee to explore implementation of statewide universal design standards for all residential buildings. It has membership here. I'm not going to go through each one of them. There are some individuals who are on the committee that came out of the study committee that came out of the Senate bill there that are on the House committee, but there's a lot of the overlap isn't 100%. Some people are the same, some people are different. But this committee is looking at, again, statewide universal design standards for residential buildings. If you want to have conversations.
So they've morphed, sorry, I'm just trying to understand. And now our sections begin to divide. So this is section 4 in their bill and section 5 in ours.
Yep.
And here they have morphed onto our disability, our housing for developmentally disabled.
So they're two totally different things.
Oh, okay.
The committee that you all included in your bill, which is on the right.
Right.
Is creating an action plan to develop housing for individuals with developmental disabilities.
Right, that was our task force.
Their committee on the House, which is on the left, is looking at development and implementation of statewide universal design standards for residential buildings. My understanding is these are standards that are really intended to ensure that a building, is easily habitable by someone with physical disabilities. So
Right,
they're-
and my concern with this section is that my understanding of this committee is that we're very interested in looking and exploring a statewide building code. We have at the moment a study going on about statewide energy code. And to me, we need to bring them all under the same umbrella. I don't understand. I mean, we're gonna talk about statewide building code. It should include design, it should include energy, it should include everything to make it simple.
So you have
So, but that's not what this is. This is just on universal design.
and there is currently, I pulled up the interim report. In
Yeah,
Act
we
one
have-
51, there is a building energy code work group. And part of their charge is to consider whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code. Their final report, I believe, is due either later this year or next year. If you would like to discuss from someone from Legislative Council about this in depth, it's Damian Leonard.
Damien. So the question I have, and maybe other committee members have, I mean, I don't want to duplicate efforts. Time is so precious. And we already have a study committee looking at statewide energy code and the possibility of a statewide building code, which I think we all, from our discussion here, I thought we were all pretty supportive of that idea. Why aren't we just adding this as a request to that study committee?
That is
Did they
a
discuss?
question that I cannot answer.
Okay, did they discuss that?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
And when's the study committee supposed to come back with a report?
This committee or the current?
No, the current one, it's, I think in
I
January,
would have to double check.
because that has a lot of stuff we're very interested in, energy code and the statewide building.
It's submit a final report to the General Assembly in November of 2020.
Yeah, and so I guess that's my question is, how could we be more efficient about this and ask that they, and they, anyway, it's obviously requires more discussion and, I would love, who is the, does anyone know who the current chair is of the task force looking at energy code? It strikes me that
It is, it was Christopher Bray and Scott Campbell appear to be co-chairs.
okay, so Scott Campbell, we should ask him.
How does that work where a member of a working group is no longer a member of the legislature?
It depends on
Continue.
how it was drafted. So it was drafted as chair of Senate Natural Resources. It then Ann would automatically go on as co-chair.
Yeah, how did membership get formed? That's my question.
Well, we can find out.
I don't believe it's
But that's
a
a,
question.
if it's sort of ex officio, I mean, if it's identified in statute as the chair and, then it would be,
Well, usually you'll see like it's one member of, one senator or one member of the House of Representatives. And if that member is, if that individual is no longer a representative or senator, I don't know if they are automatically removed.
so we're facing this challenge with you may remember last year we had a task force to look at regionalization of services of emergencies of a number of things. It was sort of a county study, if people refer to it, but it's and the two chairs were Mike McCarthy and Ruth Hardy as chairs of those committees. So it was designated as the chairs of those committees. So now the committee's a little stalled, but Brian and Matt are going to be co-chairing it and moving forward is from what I understand. However, and did Damien staff this committee?
I do not believe that. I don't know. I don't know if it requires the support of our officer.
If the committee, it sounds like, would you be interested in seeing this sort of not as an additional, just standalone task force and maybe being included in sort of looking at standardized building code, energy codes and building codes and adding this as a piece of it?
I
Yes.
think it'd be worth bringing them in at some point, those chairs.
Yeah.
Get a kind of a status report and see if they're amenable to it.
I think that's good. Let's get Scott Campbell in.
I'm gonna play a new guy card to this committee on this one. I'd really defer to you. It seems like you have these pieces better in your mind as to previous work.
I have some of the
Whatever your
pieces.
suggestions are.
Yeah. And I just hate duplication of effort, just given how little.
And I just want to make sure that they, A, can do it and be
Yeah.
capable
Well,
of
they're-
doing it based on their
Yeah,
But
and
that-
if they're willing to take it on, we might consider extending the time for the report. So I think those are the two things that we might look up at. So let's get Scott Campbell. And so why did you suggest Damien would be good for this?
Jamie, residential building codes are in his
Oh,
portfolio.
okay, right.
And he is more knowledgeable to speak to what is universal design and can
Right.
probably speak better to that committee, you know.
So we'll get Elizabeth and Scott and Damien. Okay, great.
Okay.
Because I would love as much as possible to not duplicate our work on energy codes, standardized building codes, and now this. I
Okay.
would like to add that. Okay, great.
All right, I will comment that there was compensation for members of the committee and there was an appropriation of $15,000. The $15,000
So the standard
was in the budget for that committee. Okay, moving on, section 5. Determination of education property tax grand list. So this is a section that requires municipalities to provide information to the Department of Taxes in compiling education property tax grand list information, as you can see. The request from the administration is to add this language here. So municipalities would be required to provide an extract of the assessor database, also referred to as computer assisted mass appraisal system or computer assisted mass appraisal database. I'm not an expert on what those systems are. You should probably have the Department of Housing and Community Development come in and speak to that. My understanding is this is public information, but this is all in line with trying to gather as much information as possible
Right.
on current properties that exist in efforts to try to compile some sort of
Right.
rental housing database without requiring a statewide rental housing registry.
Right.
That
And
is
this is-
testimony that has been provided.
We did work on this last year and we had a different landing spot. And this is our effort to make the Keisha, correct me if I'm wrong, to make the landlord certificate more robust.
Yeah,
And so we were marrying these two pieces. So,
but it's,
So this is different than the landlord certificate. piece.
Yeah.
It is-
no, but the
Yeah.
next piece, it does marry it, I believe.
I think they go hand in hand together as far as the efforts to try to build this information.
Almost sure.
which director are we talking about?
It is in the tax department.
Okay, so I mean, I think we should have the tax
Oh, I think we should have,
department in, because we haven't really talked to Bill Schultz yet.
I think we need to have, this would really be Jill Remick. This is property value and,
No, I know, we just have a new tax commissioner.
yeah, let's ask,
Crazy.
Bill and Jill and Bill and Jill. And then I think we also need to ask, maybe VHFA again, because they were the original proposers of this.
It's true.
And let's do that for section 5. Okay, great.
Section 6. So these are the tax credits for affordable housing, VHFA. They were in both
We're
the
on
House and
page
Senate
14.
versions. Yes, ma'am. There is no difference. They were the same. So this is the tax credits for the first generation homebuyer program and the down payment assistance program. They were the same in both committees.
Great.
They were,
Survive.
the House Ways and Means Committee proposed an amendment to sunset the first generation home buyer. It's not sunset in the bill. So initially, when I went to Ways and Means was supportive, but they wanted to repeal it in 5 years as a sunset to check back. But ultimately, it was stripped in House appropriations as it was stripped in Senate appropriations. They did not make it in the House budget as passed.
Okay, so on the table though, from the House's point of view, is a sunset that was introduced by Ways and Means.
The House General Committee, General and Housing, supported these tax credits. They were supportive of the amendment from Ways and Means to sunset the first generation homebuyer tax credit. But ultimately.
And do you know the
it didn't-
date of the sunset?
It was 5 years. So it was, I believe it was intended to sunset at the end of FY 30, I believe.
12/30? Or,
It would sunset, the sunset would take effect July 1 of 2030. So
Oh, 6/30.
effective for fiscal year 30.
okay,
So it was a 5-year sunset. And if you recall, the down payment assistance was being just extended for 5 years to 2031. So,
okay.
okay. The next section, section 7, is Department of Housing and Community Development Land Bank report. So the Department of Housing and Community Development issued a report at the beginning of this year discussing the positives, I'll say, of creating a land bank. A land bank, would be used to, essentially step in to, purchase and hold, properties that may be vacant or
Blighted.
blighted. Thank you. To either hold for private developers to come in afterwards, or, to then turn around and sell for development, et cetera. So, the report that the HCD issued has some good examples of circumstances in which, a land bank in this state would have been able to take advantage of circumstances where properties were lost to development. Because financing wasn't able to be pulled together timely, or just the timing didn't work, et cetera. The report didn't really provide clear mechanisms of how to create this. It talked about the positives of having one. It talked about how they're used in other states, et cetera. So the House General Committee wanted DHCD to continue that work and to come back with a report. And as you can see under the sub 1, 2, and 3, with proposed legislative language specific to creating a statewide land bank, authorization of regional or municipal land banks, and identifying funding proposals to support the sustainability of each separate model. So could create a statewide. There was discussion among the committee of, maybe we don't need a statewide, maybe we want regional land banks. My understanding is currently some regions in the state already have them.
Some towns are, yeah.
Correct. And so they wanted, both models to be proposed and funding to be identified for it.
So in this section, it strikes me, the conversation about a number of things could take place. We clearly want to make it easier, I think, generally for us to address blighted properties. And this may be our section where we want to talk about eminent domain, some of the tools that we might be wanting to enable towns to use to create land banks from blighted properties. This is also a section where we might want to consider a vacancy tax, possibly. I mean, just to get at, again, blighted properties or unused properties that either the town now owns or that the bank owns. I mean, I think this is, or we could task the DHCD in their report to come back or to explore more things. Could they explore eminent domain as a possibility for how a town could effectively and simply, under what circumstances? Anyway, I think this area is where we could have some of the discussions that I know some members of our committee are keen on having to make it simpler for towns actually to effectively improve properties that they are and to hold on to them for needs.
Section 8, and the following two sections can't speak to because they're related to the provisions in the bill around appeals. So this is Ellen's subject matter area. My understanding is she's coming to talk to you all on
She's
Tuesday.
coming on Tuesday.
Yes, ma'am. So section 8, section 9,
So sorry, section 8 is the appeals.
and section 9 and section 10. And I'm kind of scrolling to get to the next piece on page 20, where I will pause just to say that the appeals study, moving the study up from the land use review board regarding
Yep, that's the
appeals,
thing.
that's this name in both bills, moving it up to November 15th.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to page 22.
So sections 9 through 11 are the appeals.
8, 9, 10, and 11.
8 through 11. Okay.
And, technically 12 is the blurb study about appeals, but
Yeah, but that's the same. I'm trying to do this.
so that brings us to page 22. So we're moving into brownfields now. And what you'll see is the next 3, I believe it's 3 sections, are very similar, if not the same in each bill. So this is the section related to brownfield property cleanup program. So this is where the secretary has to prioritize the review and remediation of sites that contain housing. What I've highlighted is the Senate version, where the House has added additional language to say, or so sites that contain housing or sites that are planned for the construction or rehabilitation of single family or multifamily housing.
That seems superfluous to me, but
Yeah, I mean, once you say housing, one assumes everything.
This is O'Grady's area, so I can understand that comment, but I would defer to him on if it carries any legal distinction.
Well,
Okay.
Brady in.
Section 14, the Brownfield Process Improvement Report that you all have. This is similar language.
well, okay, so I'm just trying to read it.
Yes,
So
Sorry, are you on C?
yeah.
this is, oh.
I'm just trying to help them out here because, so what they're saying is it doesn't have to be a site that contains housing. It can be a site that's planned for housing. But if you're planning for the rehabilitation of housing, then the housing's already there. So this just seems to me to be constructed in too complicated of a way.
Well, I like the bit that just says, or is planned for the construction.
Exactly.
Period.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's
I think
that's
that's all.
what I'm getting. Yeah.
I understand what you are both saying and
I just wanted to
defer to
keep
Michael O'Grady.
reading it
Yes.
because I can see how we left out future housing.
Right.
So that's helpful.
Okay, the process improvement report for brownfields. This is, similar language in both bills, as you can see. And then moving into the next section here, this is, FY $24. If you all recall, was wanting to move this money from the Department of Environmental Conservation to this contingency fund for flexibility in using the dollars. That is the same in the House and Senate version. So now we move to section 16. I'm on page 24. So again, this is as introduced, not as passed. As introduced, the House General Committee had a section which would authorize a municipality to vote. Or I should say, authorize a municipality to recommend and then the voters to vote on whether to enact a 1% tax on short-term rentals. And as you can see in sub B, nothing in this section affects the validity of any existing provision of law or municipal charter. Some municipalities already do tax short-term rentals. They have that authority in their charter. So this was struck
And
by.
actually, we gave all towns, charter or no charter, the ability to create an ordinance on short-term rentals.
Yes, the towns
Which
have
would have
the,
included it.
I don't think so. So they do have the towns, municipalities do have the authority to regulate short-term rentals either via ordinance or bylaw.
So registration fee is not a tax. Or they can have a registration fee, but they can't tax the activity.
Correct.
Right?
And so that is my,
So we've allowed them to create registries where a registration fee can be paid one time, but I don't think they have the ability to tax the amount of activity that is actually economic activity that is used by the short-term rental.
But okay, this is really concerning to me because communities currently have a rooms and meals local option tax.
correct. For starters, it did not make it in the bill that
What?
passed. It was struck by the Ways and Means Committee and the Appropriations Committee, neither of which support.
So this is struck as it came to us.
Yes.
That's
The
the
as-passed version is gone. There are a few different things at play here. So there was discussion among the committee about the local option tax.
Okay,
So municipalities do have the capacity now to enact a 1%
Yeah.
rooms tax. There was discussion about whether to add into the local option tax, that they could add an additional on top of rooms, add an additional tax on short-term rentals. Those are administered by the tax department. The committee, when we discussed this, they wanted to allow this to happen at the municipal level and not have it be the tax department that's collecting it. So this would be a municipality enacting, collecting.
who's they?
enforcing.
This is the who can be?
This is the House General.
Okay, yeah, so no one that really does tax law.
It went to the tax, it went to Ways and Means.
The committee understood that they were not the experts in tax policy. And so they put this in here and hoped that the Ways and Means Committee would then take it, work on it, improve it, etc. The tax department came in with concerns about, legitimate concerns about the language, about how it would actually be carried out and enacted. For that reason and for others on the record, the Ways and Means Committee said they were very much interested in tax stabilization. And if you recall, I believe it was just last year, the last biennium, you all enacted a statewide tax.
We
on
did.
short-term rentals.
Mhm.
So the Ways and Means Committee recommended removing the section,
Yeah,
and it was removed, so it is not in the bill.
Yeah.
As passed and changed.
Right.
it just should be said, like, I can't see a way to write this year, or I just can't see a way to write this that makes sense, that isn't way outside of the scope of how we tax rooms.
Yeah, if you're doing lodging, although Burlington just did a 4% tax on just short-term rentals, as I recall.
No, they did a
On all
4%
housing.
tax on all rooms.
So we had this conversation when I was going to propose to raise additional money for housing. I would propose that we raise the housing have a housing fee of a surcharge of 1%. And Keisha then told me, well, Burlington has just passed 4% on all lodging. That would be a challenge. So anyway, Ways and Means to struck this. So for the moment, this conversation is off the table.
It is not in the bill that you have.
Okay. Then let's look at section.
Okay, section 17. So this is where we get into the landlord certificate piece. So section 17
So they struck our language from last.
repeals what was passed last year. So last year, there were changes made to the landlord certificate, and it goes into effect July 1 of this year. So this strikes that, repeals it, and then reinserts new changes to the landlord certificate, which are slightly different. And I apologize, I was trying to find my copy where I highlighted the specifics that were different, and I didn't bring it with me, so I'd be happy to share that with you all. Or I can pull up Act 181 real quick if you would like me to, if you want to.
Tanya will be here in about 4 minutes.
Okay, so then I'm gonna keep going, but I'll
Why
circle
don't
back to
we
this, and
tag
I
it?
will let you know what
Oh.
specifically is different. But just so you know, that there's slight difference in the changes
Yeah.
here about what is going to be required as part of the landlord certificate information.
Got
that we provide.
If you could come back specifically able to address owner or landlord, because I just don't remember us having both options, and I think it would give us,
I'll come
I
back
don't
and
know
let you
what
know
the
exactly
intent
what's
is
being
there.
changed.
Yeah.
Yes.
So on this section and on the section 5, which is the CAMA piece,
Yes,
we will have BHA tax, and
I mean, DHCD is coming in anyway to talk
DHCD,
about everything.
right. So we'll have all three to address those sections. And maybe this is a good, do you have 1 or 2 more sections before we?
I
pivot to
can probably wrap this up very quickly.
Okay, let's,
So this next section is the VHFA offsite construction report. You all, this was in one of the draft versions of your bill. If you
all right,
recall,
you're on page,
I'm on page 26,
okay, right,
section 19.
Yep.
The VHFA offsite construction report. You all discussed this. It was in a draft version of your bill at one point in time. Remember, this is
we
$250,000.
let them go forward and
You
continue this
removed
work.
it from
With
your
the
bill. The House Appropriations Committee struck the $250,000 appropriation, and then they added a subsection to basically state that VHFA is not required to do the report if it's not appropriated funds, and they were not appropriated funds. So that is there. And then in section 2021, we start to get into appropriations. So I think this is probably a good place to pause.
Right,
You know,
I think that is a good place to pause, but this was very helpful. Thank you in helping identify what we need here. So on Tuesday, just to follow up, and we'll be hearing from Ellen on the appeals section, sections 8 through 11. And we'll also be hearing And if we have time, we'll be addressing buy rate, which was one of our thorny subjects we hadn't landed on. And so, our continued discussion of the buy rate, manufactured housing. So that is what we're going to talk about, in our housing work on Tuesday. So now so thank you, Cam. That
You're welcome.
was very helpful and, I think we are now going to pivot to another housing, issue, which, our colleague Tanya Vihovsky has brought forward in S91, which is a tenants' rights issue. And Heidi has a copy for all of us. And this dovetails into an issue that I think, and Cam, you're going to stay
Yes,
there,
ma'am.
partner with.
Yes,
Tanya.
yes, I'm here.
Great, Tanya, come join us. And because I think and Tanya also served on the landlord tenant eviction studies this summer, which we have talked about a bit as being fairly incomplete. The work got started late. So in addition, once you go through this I think we're thinking that work, we still need to have that work done. And then how best would move that forward. You might give us a thought on that at the end. But let's start with S91.
Absolutely. So S91 is much of what we discussed on
Introduce yourself.
sorry, for the record, Senator Patty Vihovsky.
It's good to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. So S91 really took a lot. So the Landlord Tenants Commission took testimony on a lot of issues, but drew very few conclusions. And this bill incorporates most of what we discussed, as well as some other ideas meant to protect tenants. So it includes just cause eviction. It includes the tenant's legal right to representation in an eviction case. One of the things we've heard in judiciary is that actually greatly speeds up the length of time that those cases move through the court system. So I think that that's actually an aspect that is helpful for both the tenant and the landlord, because one of the things we've certainly heard from our landlords and the Landlord Tenant Commission is that those cases can take a long time. This bill also creates an ombudsman for tenants and housing. I think I actually call it the Office of the Tenant Advocate, which is sort of based on our Office of the Healthcare Advocate, but for tenancy. I did not name where that would go, but in my mind, legal aid or CBOEO seem like natural potential homes for it, but I simply named, that an RFP would go out for a nonprofit that has expertise in landlord tenant matters. This bill also sets up tenant or community first right to purchase if rental buildings are being sold. So that would allow a tenant or a group of tenants or a community to purchase a building that is being sold. It also stands up a revolving loan fund to help with down payments for those purchases. What else does this bill do?
So, yeah.
Did you have a question?
No, it just was, so the revolving loan fund, would enable the tenants to go through the process of trying to buy the building in a cooperative fashion or something.
Right, it would give them access to the capital for a down payment if they needed it. I lost my train of thought. What else does this bill do?
No, you're going through all the big buckets that this
Yes.
bill addresses.
Yeah,
Speeding up the eviction process, ombudsperson, building being sold, revolving loan fund.
maybe.
That's a lot of.
Oh, the other thing it does, and I actually think Senator Ryan still has a bill on the wall in this committee that does the same thing, is it protects immigrants' housing.
Mhm.
Which we incorporated in part
Yeah.
into our housing bill.
Yeah. As often happens, there's the same idea in multiple
Yeah.
places. But that is also in this bill. And I know is moving somewhere else.
Mhm.
Well, we moved it. We passed it.
Yes.
But it has multiple numbers on the house side too.
Right.
Happily, Mark is aware of that.
Yeah, and so again, what I really did is there's also some rent stabilization in the bill. As we know, the cost of housing has skyrocketed all over the country and particularly in Vermont. And that is one of the aspects that is leading us to struggle housing people.
And is your idea with rent stabilization to tie it to more of our public money? Or
So
to-
so
I mean,
it's
'cause it is
CPI,
already.
it's CPI plus one, I believe, in the bill. So it's tied to the
Mobile homes.
yeah, it's very similar to the mobile home rent.
Yeah, except the
Stick with it.
CPI for mobile homes, we found out is actually separately calculated.
Oh, interesting,
Yes.
interesting. I do believe.
HUD sets its own CPI.
Well, but it is based on that same rent stabilization idea of CPI plus one.
Is yours required stabilization or is it a negotiation and an automatic notice if your rent is?
It's required stabilization if the vacancy rate is below a certain amount. If the vacancy rate rental vacancy rate climbs above that, then it is no longer required. Just recognizing that the vacancy rate being as low as it is one of the problems. It's a temporary measure while the vacancy rate is low, and if there's more housing and vacancy, then it,
Do you have a threshold for the vacancy rate?
yeah, I just don't remember what it is.
Okay.
And,
I think healthy is 5.
I think
We never reached.
it's something, it is right, I think it's 5 or 8% or something.
Okay.
Like I tied it to that rate. It's been a really long time since I was working on this bill.
Yeah.
so I guess and maybe you just answered it, but I didn't. What properties does this apply to?
All.
Oh, rental.
All rental units statewide.
But is it the vacancy rate in a county? Or is it just the statewide vacancy rate? Because Chittenden County is really different than.
It's really different than Possum. I believe that in the way it is in the bill, it is statewide, but I think it would be perfectly reasonable to consider moving to a county.
Although sadly, at this point, not much. I mean, there is.
Well,
some-
Chittenden County is quite different than the rest of the
Well,
state.
actually, Winter County's lower. right now.
Really?
Yeah, we have a lower,
Wow.
but I think Rutland's is quite different, Northeast Kingdom's is quite different.
Yeah, but I think that would be a perfectly reasonable exploration to consider whether it makes more sense to do it at county level as opposed to the statewide level. But that is my recollection of what is in this bill. And there was a lot of really great testimony taken in the Landlord Tenant Commission. The report encapsulates some of it. Every aspect of this. So I want to be careful how I say this. Well, I don't know that there's a state that does every one of these things. Every one of these things is done somewhere in this country. None of them are something I made up.
Yeah.
And we took testimony from states different states and different places that do these different things about how it's working. And, for example, New Jersey has had just cause eviction for 50 years. And one of the things that they have actually seen is their rental market is healthier. They have more available rentals than neighboring New York that just enacted just cause eviction in the last couple of years.
Did New York adopt it statewide?
Yes, sort of.
I
New York adopted a sort of opt-in model statewide.
Oh, like communities could. It's interesting.
well, interesting.
Kind of like what our
What we
communities
were,
have done.
and what we were talking
Right.
about doing in a bill last year.
Well, and what Burlington's charter.
Yeah, well,
Well,
so
future.
last year we had talked about in this committee, I brought an amendment that we took to the floor that would have allowed without a charter change committees. So any community that opted in would just get to do it without
Right.
going through the charter change process.
And some pilots in
And
different
some-
parts of the state.
Yes. But that's New York did something sort of like that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions for Tanya before we turn to Kate? Questions? Thank you for taking, well, the committee did not finish its work. That's one of my concerns is the committee just started too late and did not actually come to us with any fully developed recommendations for how to resolve and improve our eviction process.
Yeah, and that's why,
And-
like I said, I took everything we talked about and I crafted it.
And so
into
you
language.
took it upon yourself to actually try and craft
Yeah.
that work.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I certainly understand that it would be kind of massive to do every one of these things all at once. But I do hope that as you go through, and, I think, again, I'm happy to talk, more about the Landlord Tenant Commission. That is a worthwhile report to just read, through what some of the testimony was. And I hope that we are able to move forward because we know we have a crisis.
We are having the chair, Emily Krasno was chair. We're having Emily come in and present it, and then we're going to discuss where we go from here with it. And so we might want to invite you in for that, discussion.
I'm happy to be part of it. And, you know, as a tenant myself, I'm hopeful that we can move forward with some basic protections for our tenants.
You're here.
Well, I was gonna say something that I hope you can react to from the task force perspective. There's a really interesting problem with no cause eviction that actually can impact both landlords and tenants, right? So it's not desirable to have an eviction on your record. So I think philosophically, the conversation that I'd like to continue is how we throw every resource we can at someone who would otherwise be evicted for non-payment of rent, and then have swift and thorough due process for all the other types of eviction, which we know are much smaller. They pale in comparison to the non-payment of rent piece, which is a economic crisis component. Everyone's living paycheck to paycheck, or, you know, debt based. But I think what we hear from landlords is they often use no cause eviction to deal with other problems that might be better adjudicated in court. And if they adjudicate them in court, that person will end up with a eviction record. So ending no cause eviction in some contexts will create more of a need to put evictions on people's records.
So that hasn't been what's happened in other states. Eviction rates have actually gone down in states that have eliminated no cause. This bill also contemplates an eviction expungement after a certain period of time.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
What's one of your favorite subjects?
Expungement.
Ceiling and expungement.
I certainly am familiar with it. But I think it would be really helpful, and we heard from these folks in judiciary actually, but some of the pro bono legal clinics in the state that have evictions have skyrocketed so much, and no cause is actually one of the largest places that's happening, that most of the housing work that some of these organizations are doing have pivoted entirely to offering advice on evictions.
Right.
And what we did hear from the folks, the Nationwide folks and the folks from New Jersey, is that actually ending no cause eviction makes the eviction rates go down.
So, right. No. I think that makes sense. Do you have a process for expunging all evictions, or what if, I mean, this is a conversation we had with judiciary last biennium. Drug dealing, criminal activity, violence, crime. There are people who want to have swifter due process there. What does your bill allow for? All expungement, or?
It allows for an expungement of any eviction after a certain period of time with no additional evictions. So it's a recognition, much like we do with sealing of criminal history records, that people can grow and change. And if they've gone a period of time without continued issues, then it's okay to let them continue.
What's that period of time?
Housing. 5 years.
5 years.
So the House had some discussion of this because the chair of House General had, oops, there you go. Had some thoughts about, and I think Emily and the committee discussed how to address this. So we also I think this deserves discussion. And we, during COVID, had VRAP, which had a piece of it that helped prevent evictions in terms of mediating the ones that were easily fixed.
That were the majority non-payment of rent, or
a domestic violence situation where a hole had been put in the wall and it just needed to be fixed. And it was, and
I think that mediation process to prevent eviction should absolutely continue.
And it was very successful from what I understand. So I think all those preventing eviction is, I think, the key to what we can. And that's the low hanging fruit piece. I think we need to.
Well, and balancing the safety of everyone in a building. So I think that's where it still deserves to be a balanced conversation around, other tenants are impacted by someone who is violent or engaging in criminal.
And gave no cause eviction would not prevent them from being evicted. They would be able to be evicted for breaking the law or breach of.
Right.
rights.
Well, and like you said, there's a desire to make that process swifter because somebody who's in a very long eviction process, when there's been accusations of of really, violent or negative behavior, can be really scary for everyone else in the business.
Absolutely. I do want to point out that in the Landlord Tenant Commission, we did hear from the judiciary that more than 75% of evictions are settled in 3 months or less. So yes, there are cases that carry on longer, but it is not the vast majority of cases. I can't remember the exact, 76% or 77%.
Is that what you heard in the task force?
Yes.
That 75%?
More than 75. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I can go dig it out of the report and send it to the committee. The exact numbers.
75% of evictions that come to the judiciary, as opposed to those evictions that are not judiciary related at all,
Well, I mean,
I assume.
yes, I mean, the judiciary can certainly only speak to what's coming through the judiciary, but an eviction is a judicial process. So if it's not coming to the
Well,
judiciary.
if it's no cause eviction, and no cause evictions aren't necessarily always formal. In many cases, they're the landlord saying, hey, you gotta move.
Mhm.
For whatever reason, then the person moves. And we don't really have any idea of what.
We certainly do not. That's when the landlord says, I'm going to evict you, and the person's like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. I'm just going to move. We can't possibly track that. But anecdotally, that it is fairly common.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the issue is if we start looking at how many evictions do we actually have, we probably have a huge number of more than we know about. So in the event that you have a no cause eviction, that number is probably going to rise into evictions that we count.
So again, I don't, that's not been what has happened in other states, but I certainly, my crystal ball is broken today, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen. But that hasn't been what's been seen in other states. And, to your point about speeding up the process, I do think due process is important, particularly when someone is going to lose their right to housing. And what we did here, in multiple different, places that having access to an attorney actually speeds that process up quite significantly without limiting, a tenant's due process, which is why that is in the bill.
Right. Yeah, I imagine an attorney can say, you don't have a great case, you might not want to fight this till the end and end up with an eviction.
Well, and civil proceedings are complex. If
Yeah.
you don't have a legal degree, it's difficult to navigate. Judges have to take more time to explain to a pro se litigant what's going on. The paperwork, there's a whole host of reasons why it would take much longer. We also heard from, I believe it was Legal Aid, that in some cases, in fact, I think they may have characterized it as many cases, the stretching on of an eviction proceeding is in large part due to decisions made not by the person being evicted, but by the person doing the eviction. I don't know where that sort of data came from. And so but I think having access to an attorney, it just makes logical sense. And I've asked attorneys who do eviction cases if that would help, and they have said yes.
Yeah. And so you're the other senator who was on this task force was Richie.
Mhm.
And you were the two senators, and Emily was the chair, and who was the other husband?
But persons.
Oh, John.
Yes.
John.
Yep.
John,
So,
right.
and then we have representatives from Legal Aid, we have representatives from, oh my goodness, we had an individual appointed by CVOAO who had themselves experienced an eviction.
Right. Well, we put that.
yes,
committee
we-
Right,
together,
yeah,
so-
that's right.
That was part of
that was
Lived
our work.
experience.
Yeah, someone from Burlington Housing Authority was there, someone from the Housing Commission.
Yeah.
So the Landlords Association was represented. And we got a lot of information, but that information sort of stopped at being information. It wasn't collated into any proposal, which is why
Why you have this bill in front of us. Okay, great. Well, I think we had Cam here to walk us through, but I think given the time and given our about to go on the floor, I think we will say thank you. Tanya, thank you very much for bringing this
Absolutely.
to us. It sort of fits into a lot of the work that I'm hoping that we will figure out how to move forward on some of these pieces. And thank you. And we will see everybody on Tuesday.
Absolutely. Thank you.